Hello, welcome to my bookshelf, and today I wanted to share with you guys all the books that I read in the month of February. So I'm going to go through this in the order that I actually finished them. So the first book that I actually finished was This Darkness Mine by Mindy McGinnis. I had such mixed feelings with this book. I really still, even to this day, am not really sure how I feel about it. This follows our main character, who is a high schooler. Her name is Sasha Stone, and she finds out that she had a twin in the womb, but her twin died, and so the twin was absorbed into Sasha. And so the twin was never born, but the twin is, like, in some sense living on through Sasha. And after she discovers this, Sasha starts noticing strange things happening. And I will just leave it at that. So it's a really interesting premise, a very unique premise, and it kind of just explores what this might look like and how this would affect Sasha and her life in general. And it takes some interesting turns. It's definitely a shocking book in some senses. I just wasn't sure what to expect while I was reading it for a while, and then things would happen, and I was like, oh, okay, we're going there. Interesting. I like I said, I have mixed feelings on it. I do appreciate the fact that it did take risks, but I'm not sure if they fully paid off for me personally. But I could see this book being something that you either really, really love, but I could also see this being a book you really, really don't like. And I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, to be honest. Yeah, this is just like, it's a book you have to experience. It really is hard to talk about it without you having read it. Definitely interesting, but I decided since I'm in the middle, I might as well just give it 3 stars. I was definitely intrigued and I wanted to finish it. I definitely wanted to know where we were going to go with it. And so it ended up being really interesting, and I think it asked some interesting questions. So it was a unique journey. So moving right along, the next book that I finished is Artemis Fowl by Ian Colfer. This is a fantasy book. It's aimed at younger audiences. I want to say like middle grade, but I do think that even as an adult, it's still enjoyable, even though it is rather simple in a lot of ways. It does present to you a really fun and interesting world. So our main character, Artemis, is a criminal mastermind, and he is super smart, and he finds out about the existence of magical creatures, and he uses this information to exploit them for money. So we have a unique protagonist here, where our protagonist is actually the bad guy, and he's committing these crimes, and we're seeing how that plays out. And I like that we get different perspectives in here. We get to see Artemis, but we also get to see these magical creatures, and so we get a really interesting glimpse into their culture and society and what it's like. And it's just genuinely a really fun story. So this is the first book in a series, so I plan to continue on, and I do think it's really fun. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I'm definitely intrigued, and I think this is a good first outing, at least. The next book I finished was Saints and Misfits by S.K. Ali, and I really, really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and this was a book I actually got from the library. So if you don't know, the basic premise of this story is that we're following our main character, Jenna, and she's a Muslim teenager, and she wears a hijab, and it really is just an exploration of her life. Like, there are obviously things that happen in the story, like plot points, but it really is just more of getting a glimpse of the saints in her life, the misfits, which is, you know, kind of where she fits in, and monsters. And there's specifically one monster in her life that keeps just ruining these moments that should be really enjoyable and fun for her, but she can't really fully enjoy it because he's kind of always lurking. And it's about these different kinds of people in your lives and how to deal with them and how different people deal with them and how she ends up dealing with them. It's just a really interesting exploration of her life. And what I really like about this book is how relatable it was on so many different levels. So obviously this book talks about some really serious and important issues. So, you know, this is, as she mentioned, trigger warning for sexual abuse. Thankfully, it's not very descriptive and like deep, like gruesome detail, so that is a good thing, but you get enough of the idea to know. And obviously, if that's an issue for you, you shouldn't read this book, but I will say that I think it does everything very respectfully, and so yes, it touches on that, but that's not the focus, like the actual incident itself. It's more about like the repercussions of that and how that affects you. And it also talks about religion, and like I said, I think it does it very respectfully, not only to the Muslim religion itself, but also to other religions and other ideologies. I did not feel like this was preachy at all. I mean, it did explain some of their beliefs and like their culture and why they do some of the things they do, but it felt necessary for the story and for explaining things. I like that it's showing the different kinds of people and how they relate to the religion, and that I think we can all relate to, because I'm sure that we all know people that fit all these different kind of characteristics and how they relate to the world and the religion. I just think it's a really interesting exploration of her life, and so because she is a religious person, it's just inherently going to involve religion. But like I said, I thought it was done really well, and I thought it brought up some really interesting points, and it was just genuinely a really good book. So other than these specific themes, I just think following Jenna's story is just an interesting experience. But like I said, I thought this was really well done, and I would highly recommend it. Alright, the next book that I finished is The Vow by Kim and Cricket Carpenter. Now, I should say that this is nonfiction, so this chronicles the true story of their lives and what happened to them. So, if you don't know, Kim and Cricket, they were in this car accident, and Cricket received serious head trauma, and she honestly, like, the doctors are just surprised she even lived, nonetheless that she recovered. So obviously she had some brain injuries, but she was able to recover extremely well from them in a fairly quick amount of time. But unfortunately, she doesn't have any memory of like the 2 years before the accident. Like, that in and of itself sucks, but what makes it even worse is that that's the time period in which she met, dated, and married her husband. So she wakes up and doesn't remember that she's married or that she has a husband or even recognize him. So it's them dealing with this truly hard situation, but ultimately keeping to their vows, death do we part. And they stick together and they stick it out, even though it is truly challenging. And I love their story. Like, I think it's really, really powerful and moving and inspirational. But the book itself, I'm giving like a 2-star, which I feel really bad about because, like I said, I really, really enjoy the story. But as a reader, I just felt like the book had some issues. I will say the parts that Kim writes are really great. I think he does a really great job of explaining what he went through and what happened. My issue with his part, I would say, was just that there was so much to the story that they don't talk about and they don't really go into. They just skim over a lot of things that, like, as a reader, I would be really intrigued to know. Now, admittedly, I also realize that that's obviously up to them, like, how much they want to share with the world, so I feel weird knocking the book for that. But, like, as the book as a whole, like, I just felt like there was so much more to the story that we didn't get, and so it was, like, disappointing as a reader, and I have a hard time, like, breaking that apart from, like, respecting their decision to not share that with us, and that's totally fine. Another issue I had with this book was the inclusion of Cricket's journals, if you want to call them that, in here. Her journals, they're really more like prayers, like written down, which is fine, and I think that's a great practice, actually. I don't do anything like exactly like that, but I do things somewhat similar. So, like, I understand it. I totally get it. I think it's really, for me, it's like a great tool. That's fine in your prayer life. But I don't know why they were included in this book to me, because it just feels weird reading someone else's prayers. Like, that should be between you and God. Like, I don't need to read that. It's a very personal thing, and it feels weird for me to be reading that. It doesn't present any new information. It's things that she mentions that we know more about from what Kim has already told us. Like, to me, it was just unnecessary and it felt like filler, if I'm being honest. So I had to knock the book because the experience of reading the book just wasn't fully enjoyable because of that, and there was just so much more that I wanted to know about this story that we didn't get. So I was just disappointed ultimately by this book. But I will say that their story itself is super inspiring and super interesting. Ultimately, I just feel like as a reader, it just didn't fully work for me. Okay, the next book that I finished was Yes Please by Amy Poehler. This was an audiobook, and I will say that it was really cool to read as an audiobook because it was read by Amy Poehler herself, and she also had a couple other, celebrity guests kind of throwing in their voices every once in a while as well. So that was really, really cool. So I'd recommend the audiobook. I think it was really well done. It was really cool to have her memoir from her perspective using her telling us it. It was just this deeper connection to the memoir. But anyway, I think that this memoir was really well done. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. She's just really funny and honest. I love that throughout the entire book she's talking about how hard it is to write a book, which I can only imagine is actually true. She manages to go through this struggle of writing a book. And I do think that she did a really good job. I think she did a good job of telling us some interesting stories, but also kind of giving us some words of wisdom and some comedy in there. And we do get a good sense of her as a person as well. And I just thought it was a fun journey. So overall, it was a really enjoyable memoir. So I'm really happy I got to read it. All right, the next book that I finished is Life's Operating Manual by Tom Shadyac. And this is nonfiction, and this is very unique. I feel like it's hard to describe, to be honest. This feels kind of philosophical and inspirational. That being said, I don't think that this is difficult to understand. I think that one of the great things about this book is that it is really down to earth and really just genuinely easy to understand. He breaks everything up into very simple ideas and he explains them. And a really cool thing about this book is that he presents to us, what's wrong with the school system and what we're missing. And then there's this dialogue, and he calls them the fear and truth dialogues. And so it's written like a dialogue. So we have fear personified, and he's the critic. So fear is tearing down the arguments that were just given for whatever the situation was. And so he's giving him some critical, feedback. And then truth is responding to each and every one and kind of explaining what they mean by that and why they're actually right and why this is really true and so on. So it's really interesting because not only are you given this really well thought out idea, but then it's also criticized and then clarified for you, the reader, throughout the entire book. I think it's just a really well done book, and I think it's really interesting. And I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars, but I will like to say that there are a couple things that he talks about in here that I do have some issue with, but I do think that the overall idea that he's presenting to us is a genuinely good idea. And an idea that really fits in with my own ideology and beliefs. Though he does mention things here and there that don't technically fit, but I think that his overall argument is correct. So while I have some minute details that are incorrect for me personally with my beliefs, I do think that the overall message is correct, so I can overlook that. But I do think that this is really well done. It's really unique, and I don't think I'm doing this justice or even explaining it very well, but I do think if you like nonfiction books that are somewhat intellectual, but not intellectual to the point where it's so dense that you can't even understand it. This is very down to earth intellectual. If you like that kind of thing, I think you would like this book. So it's hard for me to recommend this for everyone, but I do think that everyone could gain something from reading this book if you can get over the unique format. I think it was really enjoyable. Alright, and the last book that I finished this month was The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. And this was a thriller, well, it was a murder mystery thriller. So our main character is a journalist, and she is able to go on this maiden voyage of this amazing cruise. She is in cabin 9, and she hears a scream and a splash. And then she looks over, because there's balconies even though it's a cruise ship, which to me is just weird to picture because I've never been on a cruise ship. So to me, I'm like, wait, there's a balcony? But anyway, so she goes out like on her terrace or balcony, whatever you want to call it, and she can see like, you know, where cabin 10 is, like there's blood smeared on like their, like the privacy screen for cabin 10, and she's like, oh my gosh. So obviously she like screams for help. She is able to get like security and everything, and she explains what she heard and saw, and they're like, wait, cabin 10? Like there's no guests in cabin 10. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, I met the woman in cabin 10 earlier today, in fact. And they're like, And so they're like, well, let us show you. No one's in there. So they like unlock cabin 10, and they go in there, and there's literally nothing in cabin 10. There's no evidence that anyone's been there. The blood has been since cleaned off. Like, there's no evidence of a struggle or even anyone like was in the cabin. So that's the mystery presented to you. So I thought it was well done. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, but I could see why people maybe don't like it. Like, maybe this is very predictable to someone who reads murder mystery a lot. I don't really know, but I think if you're still fairly new to murder mystery, I think you will enjoy this. Alright, so there you have it. Those are all 7 books that I finished in the month of February. Admittedly, that is a little less than last month where I read 12 books, which was just unheard of, but 7 is still pretty good and definitely better than what I was doing last year on average, so I'm very proud of it, even if it is technically less than it was last month. But admittedly, February is the shortest month of the year, so maybe that had something to do with it. And on top of it, I did DNF 3 books, like books I'm not going to finish at all. So I spent time reading those books that I could have been reading books I would have actually finished. But I will say that I am proud of the fact that I actually did read every single day this month. Though admittedly some days were like 5 pages. But it's something, so I'm counting it. But anyway, I just want to, as always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. And until next time.